This month marks 2 years since my friend passed away from a heroin overdose. I was 21 at the time, and I never thought I would see my friends laying in a casket until I was well old in age. It's a day I never want to relive as long as I am young. For months, I questioned everything. Why did he do that? When it seemed like life was finally heading in the right direction for him. Why did God take away someone from us like that? Was there something I could have done? The majority of the answers I could come up with was, I don't know. A few months had passed and I got a new job at a psychology office that worked with autistic children, teens and adults. As well as family therapy, as the office manager, I had only worked there for a couple of weeks at this point and was getting patient charts ready for the therapist for the day. As I was flipping through the charts, I saw a familiar name, Michael Stewart. I thought to myself, okay, Ash, there's plenty of people with that name. It's common. Don't start thinking crazy. I pulled his chart and checked the birthday and saw that Michael Stewart had the same birthday as my friend. Now I'm thinking crazy. I pull out the picture I have of him from his funeral and look at his birthday just to confirm. And yep, that's the birthday. I catch my boss at lunch and I asked her, hey, it's cool if you can't tell me due to HIPAA reasons, but I found a chart that very much seems like my friend who just passed away in November. If I show you a pic, can you confirm if it's him? And sure enough, she told me that yes, it was in fact my friend that he used to come to her and see one of the therapists for autism-related therapy and for drug addiction, which wasn't something this therapist normally did, and suggested I should talk with her and let her know. I did just that and found out that my friend's parents, while I loved them, were extremely hard on them. He didn't really have a good record with them and they didn't trust him a lot. He got into heroin because of the weed's strongest smell. They always knew when he had it on him. He thought heroin would feel the same as weed, but his parents wouldn't be able to smell it. From there, he got addicted, and while his life was doing better and his parents weren't always checking him, he couldn't stop doing heroin. After this, I knew very well that his spirit was alive. I lived in DFW at the time, and out of the thousands of psychology offices, I work at the one he went to, and let me tell y'all, I do not think that was a coincidence. I think he had a lot to do with that. It's been quite some time since this happened, but I still remember it in detail. Back then, I lived in my old family home, an old brick building built somewhere between the late 1800s and early 1900s, as a worker accommodation during industrialization, which is kind of old, but not that old for a house in Central Europe. I always suspected that there was something wrong with the house. During the 22 years I lived there, I've accumulated quite the amount of crazy incidents, which I'd also love to share here sometime. It was the summer of 2018. I, 15 at the time, was lazing around in the living room, watching cartoons in the middle of the day until I got bored. It was one of those sunny, cozy Saturday afternoons where no one would suspect anything bad or supernatural to happen. I turned off the TV, got off the couch, and was about to leave the room when, in the middle of the doorframe, I got the sudden sensation that I should stop, that something was blocking my path. At the same time, I heard it. There was a loud and deep growling noise, like from a large and very angry dog, but even louder and deeper. I could feel it vibrating in my whole body, like the bass during a concert, and it felt like the sound was coming from directly in front of me. Never before in my life had I felt like my life was in danger. At that moment, I did. Only my reptile brain was working, choosing freeze out of the fight, flight or freeze response. My whole body tensed. I could feel every hair on my body stand up, as if some primal instinct made my body react like prey in front of a predator. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The noise was gone. The feeling that something was in front of me was gone, and I was staring into an empty and bright dining room. My knees gave out from under me, and I let myself slide onto the floor, gasping for air. In all those years, I tried to find an explanation for what happened. It couldn't have been a dream, as I was wide awake and it was the middle of the day. It couldn't have been a loud noise from a truck or other heavy vehicle outside, as it came from the wrong direction and no one else heard it. It couldn't have been the neighbour's dog, as I heard him bark, growl, howl, and jump around many times, and all the noises he made were way more muffled and quite a lot quieter through the walls. While a bunch of other things happened in this house and often repeatedly, this growl only happened once and never again. I still think about it from time to time, and it still gives me a weird gut feeling. And I have noticed that I'm not the only one who has experienced this phenomenon. So if anyone wants to share their story or has any idea what this could have been or any rational explanation, please let me know. I'm curious about your stories and theories. This was in the late 2000s. I don't remember exactly the year, and it happened to my then wife and myself in our home. We lived in a nice, quiet area. Our home was at the end of a road. In front of our house, there was obviously a road. On each side, we had neighbours whose homes were anywhere from 50 to 100 feet away. At the back of the house, it was woods for miles and miles. We used to love seeing all the wildlife that would enter our property at one time or another. But as I said, the biggest plus was how peaceful it was. It was wintertime in southern Massachusetts. A cloudy night, but no storms, and it was around 11:30. We were in our living room just watching some movies. I was relaxing on an easy chair, lazy boy style. My wife was sitting on a small couch, about 6 feet from me. There was no noise but for the movie going on, and all of a sudden there was a flash. Everything went all white for a tiny fraction of a second. Like all you could see was just the colour white. And when that was over, really quickly as you may imagine, something was very different. You see, the room was really a huge addition that the house's previous owners had done, I guess, sometime in the 90s. They built that and a sizable deck outside it. The room was very large and had cathedral ceilings, which at its top must have easily reached 15 feet. This is a guess, I don't know for sure. It looked like it would go up forever. On the ceiling, there were a bunch of small lights and a skylight. Being nighttime, the skylight looked like a black square, and the lights were providing great illumination. Courtesy of a dimmer, the lights were just right. Not too strong, not too weak. Well, right after the flash had gone, I looked up to the ceiling and what I saw froze me in place. Gone were the lights. Gone was the square skylight that was dark because it was night. Starting from about 7 feet up from the floor, yes, had we stood up, we could have feasibly touched it. There was what looked like an inverted, as in upside down, pool of what looked like, for the lack of better words, milk. But it had a strange glow to itself. I watched, fascinated, as this white stuff rippled gently, with small waves, like it really was a thick liquid. My mind was horrified and curious at the same time, because I couldn't think of any phenomenon that could have caused what I was seeing. A pool of glowing milk, lazily rippling, suspended above our heads. I immediately thought that I must have imagined that, and to get confirmation that I wasn't having some medical emergency that made me see things, I looked at my wife who was on the couch. She was staring up at the same thing with her mouth open. All of a sudden, in another flash and in a blink of an eye, the pool of white stuff wasn't there any longer. It had lasted maybe 10 seconds, and everything had gone back to normal. My wife turned to look at me, wild-eyed, and I said, "Did you just see that?" And she said yes. I asked her what she thought it was, and she said she had no idea. I dabbled with the idea that this was some odd lightning thing, but there wasn't any storm, and I'm not aware of any natural phenomenon with these characteristics. Nothing was damaged. In that room, there was a good deal of electronics, and what we saw looked damn solid. As I said, the consistency and look of regular milk. I remember thinking that the ripples and little waves I was seeing in that stuff was something that they hit your body, you'd have really felt them. It felt like whatever this was, it had substance. In any case, this really spooked me big time. Something strange happened last night, and I remember something very similar happened when I had my firstborn 4 years ago, which I had forgotten about. I've lived in my current house for 10 years, and nothing eventful happened until my first baby was born. Nothing major, just the feeling of being watched, the sound of footsteps upstairs, etc. Very subtle things, but noticeable. I'd also wake up and see what I can only describe as an electric man in my room that I would see for a few seconds and then it would be gone. I put that down to dreaming. When my boy reached about 10 months, it stopped and things returned to normal. My second baby is a week old. Last night, I was sitting in my bedroom with my newborn feeding him a feed before I went to sleep with the nightlight down the hall in my oldest son's room turned off. 3 seconds later, I could hear a voice say something that wasn't my son's. I shit myself and got my son out of the room and had him sleep in the bed with me. I happened to mention this to my partner today, and he said that's really weird because he slept in there for part of the night last night. No room in the big bed with all three of us in, so we left our bed in the early hours and had terrible nightmares which he doesn't usually have. Is this a thing? New baby triggers weird stuff happening in people's houses? I also remember being on the phone to my mother last year, talking about something that was really stressful. The conversation was so tense that I didn't notice the banging upstairs until it got really loud and shook my chandelier hanging in the living room. I got halfway up the stairs when a door slammed, so I grabbed my son and ran next door. I asked my neighbour to come back into the house with me while I checked upstairs. Nothing there and no windows open. My neighbour said he had been hearing banging for the last 10 minutes coming from my house and was wondering what it was. I was so preoccupied on the phone to my mom, I didn't notice till it was really loud. Anyone else have something similar? I grew up with a mom who was very interested in the paranormal, but I was freaked out by it and never wanted anything to do with it. I had my first paranormal experience last year that is impossible to believe wasn't real. I went to live in a friend's house during the beginning of the pandemic last year and stayed there for around 5 or 6 months. I'm really close to her family and they're like my second family. A bit before this time, she had explained to me that her father had been violent towards her and there was just a lot of general negativity in the house. Me going there was great for her and her sister because their parents wouldn't fight or anything while I was present. I was sharing a room with my friend and sleeping on a futon right by the door. There was no furniture, chairs, clothes, nothing here. One night, I randomly woke up, very unusual for me, and felt I needed to look at the foot of the bed. Her door is stark white. I saw the figure of a small black creature that looked like a really skinny man with a large head. I didn't feel scared at all. I felt like it was just observing me. I kept looking at it for a minute, then shined my phone at it, and it was gone. I told my friend's sister about it, thinking it was a dream, but the night before she told me she also saw it. She thought her cat was on her shelf, but looked and saw this black little outline of a man moving her legs around. We researched about it a bit and came to the conclusion that it might have been thriving off of the negative energy in the home and was observing me as a new person who didn't have the same negative energy. After that night, we didn't see it again. I left their house about a year ago and I don't know if they spotted it again. I'm currently a 50-year-old male living in Greenville, South Carolina, and my first paranormal experience occurred back when I was in middle school. I had an uncle named Eddie who bought and restored historic houses, essentially a high-end flipper before we all knew what the hell that was. He purchased a house that was in the historic area of Earl Street here in Greenville. I don't remember the exact street, but it was definitely in that area. And he invited my grandfather over to look at some of the work he was doing. My papa was a carpenter, and I routinely tagged along just to get to spend time with him and watch him work. We got there and got the grand tour, and were told that an elderly woman had lived there and was heating her upstairs bedroom with a kerosene heater of some sort. The fumes from the heater suffocated her, and she ended up dead and wasn't found for a good while. My uncle bought the house at an estate auction because the family was unwilling to deal with the aftermath of that, and he set about working to get it in shape to resell. After Uncle Eddie gave us the tour and talked about what he was wanting done, he asked if we were hungry and offered to run and grab some burgers for us while Papa figured out what he'd need in order to do the work necessary. We gave him our order and Uncle Eddie took off for the food, so it was just Papa and myself left in the house. Nothing really spooky happened right off, and from what I remember, there were no vibes to the place. So Papa did what he needed to do while Uncle Eddie was gone, and then we popped a squat on the stairs and started killing time until the food arrived. Around 5 minutes after we settled on the stairs, we both started hearing what sounded like footsteps at the top of the stairs, walking back and forth along the hall. Then we heard what sounded like a door open and close. Figuring someone else had to be there, we went upstairs and to our surprise, found no one else there. We were 100% alone in the house. Rattled, we sat back down on the stairs and waited to see if we heard it again. And it didn't take long before we definitely heard the sound of someone walking around upstairs. There was no denying it was footsteps on the second floor. Then we heard the stairs creaking as if someone was coming down the steps, only we were sitting on them looking straight up the staircase, and there was absolutely no one there. The footsteps continued down the stairs very slowly, and both of us were too stunned to even move. I remember feeling like I couldn't move at all, but I think that was due to fear and not whatever was going on around us. I don't feel like anything was making me stay where I was. I was just too freaked to process anything other than hearing this invisible person slowly coming down the stairs. The footsteps walked past us, even making the step we were sitting on creak as it went by. Then it walked into the foyer of the house and ceased entirely. At this point, we both decided we weren't really feeling this ghost house shit and left to go sit in Papa's truck until Eddie returned. Well, of course, we told Eddie about what happened and were surprised when he said that he'd heard noises and footsteps in the house too, but it wasn't going to stop him from finishing up the work and selling the house. That's someone else's problem, he laughed, and then asked my Papa if he was able to do what he needed done inside. Papa politely declined, and after some nervous laughter, we left. Eddie's wife ended up falling in love with the house, and he renovated it for her and they lived there until his death about 15 years ago. So I guess whatever that ended up actually being, his problem after all. So, when I was young, my parents would drop me and my brothers off at my grandparents' house when they would just need time away from us kids, which they deserved. My grandparents live around 30-ish minutes away from us, so it wasn't that far of a drive for my parents. Well, one night when I was around 4 or 5, my parents left us with our grandparents for the whole weekend. I can't remember what night it happened, or really most of the weekend, because I was very young. I was sleeping in the living room with my brothers because there were random holes in the upstairs floor that weren't safe for misfit children like us. So, where I was sleeping, my head was directly in front of the stairs. My grandparents lived in the country, so it was very dark at nights because there were obviously no street lights. Well, sometime in the middle of the night, I randomly woke up, and when I looked up the stairs, for some instinctual reason, I saw a girl in a white dress. I didn't see her face, but she had long dark hair and a white gown that went down to her feet. She stood there at the top for the little bit, then just walked towards my mother's childhood room that was at the very right of the stairs. I wasn't worried or scared, but rather calm and acknowledged her, and I went right back to sleep. I didn't realise what I saw until years later, and for the longest time, I kept it to myself because I thought my childish imagination could have made it up when I was younger. It wasn't until I told my mom that I think I saw a ghost when I was younger at my grandparents' house, my mom's parents. She had told me that she had seen her too when she was younger. She too woke up from sleeping in her room and wasn't scared, but calm too. She described the girl, and it was the very same girl I saw too. My mom said it had walked out her window, and she never saw her again. My mom and I had only seen her one time, and we were both children. We had asked my brothers and my uncle, my mom's brother, and they thought we were crazy, so it's obvious they had never seen her. So I assume that she only shows it to young girls and not boys. I would ask my grandparents if they had seen her too, but they had passed about 4 years before I even said what happened out loud. Anyway, I hope this made sense and wasn't too all over the place. This was my first prominent experience with seeing an actual ghost. I still think about this event a lot, so it's definitely made an impact on my life. This happened when I was a bit younger, still in elementary school. My dad has a 2-story house with a rotted away basement. We've only been in it a couple times. At the time, there were 5 of us, not including my dad. We decided we would sleep in the living room that night because it was cold and that was the only room that had a fireplace. I remember my brothers, 5, 6 and 6, were asleep on the couch and lounge chair, while my sister and I, 8 and 7, were asleep on the floor. My littlest brother woke me up around 2, wondering if I had walked into the bathroom and jumped out the window and came inside. I said no, I've been asleep. He looked at my sister and his face went pale. He said he definitely saw a girl go in there, so he's a little unsure of who it was. Now, I would have chalked it up to his 5-year-old imagination, except for the fact that we had motion-censored lights, and the light was on. After that, it was quieter for another 15 minutes. The light in the bathroom had shut off. Suddenly, we all heard heavy footsteps coming down the stairs. The only one upstairs was my dad, who we could hear shifting around in his bed. Everyone was scared. The bathroom door then swung open, but nobody came out. Finally, we woke up around 2 hours later to see a girl standing in the corner of our living room, back to us. Don't know what to make of it, but all of my siblings recall the same story to this day. When I was in high school, senior year, my brother, 12 years older than me, who's an architect, asked for my help on a commission for a building model on scale. He usually only had me go and glue the smaller pieces that were boring to do, and just bought some pizza and left me to watch movies on his couch. This time, the project was a little big, and he was going to pull an all-nighter on me. It was around 2 a.m. when I just started to surrender to the spell of the Sandman and fell asleep. I'm well known in my family and around friends for being the sleep talker. My wife constantly kicks me when I talk sleep, because sometimes I even sing. Bad shower singing. I usually am aware of what I'm saying because I actually dream of the things I talk about when asleep. Often, it is just a blurry dream, but I know I'm talking because I end up waking myself up when this happens, especially if I scream or go loud in a dream. It was just around 3:15 when I felt a sudden move. My brother, who had this pretty shocked and concerned look on his face, had shaken me down to my bones in a rush to wake me up. I remember I was dreaming of a scene where different entities were surrounding some kind of altar, with a person sitting in the middle, and I was speaking in a language I couldn't understand. By that time, my brother was perplexed, talking to me and asking me if I was all right. He said I was speaking in Dutch, a language I've never learned or heard of, and I was chanting/praying something like, "Please save us all, God Almighty, forget our sins." My brother knows German, but he never spoke in front of me or my family in different languages than Spanish. We're from Mexico. And there were zero to no movies in my youth spoken in Dutch. I pretty much only knew Spanish and a little English back then. The creepy thing is that he said I was pretty much going quiet at first, saying other things and mumbles in Spanish. Every word I spoke was a little more clear than the last one, until I was speaking fluently, randomly words of fear like apocalypse, shadows, death. As if I was just playing bingo with Halloween words. To this point, it was all normal for my brother, as I often did this. Not with those choices of vocabulary though, but then I stopped and suddenly started speaking Dutch and pretty much screaming the prayers out loud. I'm being honest, I cannot remember hearing myself in the dream as I normally do when I go loud. I would have woken me up. I was honestly dead asleep to the point my brother had to shake me vigorously to wake me up. This hasn't happened again, but once, a friend during a sleepover told me I was mumbling words that sounded Asian. I didn't scream that time, but it legitimately sounded like I was having a solid conversation with someone. I didn't believe him, but he had me on tape. We haven't found anyone that can actually translate it, but a friend from Korea said that it sounded like a language some relatives of him speak, that is exclusive of an island in Korea called Jeju, but he couldn't translate as it was different from what he speaks. This happened in December 2018, just before Christmas. Me, two of my lads, we were 17 at the time, and a cousin of mine, 15, were camping in the woods of a friend's property. We were there for 5 days, pretty much all by ourselves except for water, that we would hike back to the house to grab for the day, since it was pretty impractical to get water ourselves for 5 days. This region is relatively dry and no water filters, etc. We'd lie down pretty early, which felt rather primitive, literally when the sun set. Every night we'd hear boars around our tent and steps. Paranoia fueled it a lot, but hey, we had a bow, 2 axes, and some big knives. One day though, and I think this was either the last night or the one before that, we were just having a chat after dinner like we would often do, and we heard a scream. It was pretty odd. Didn't sound human. But I have no clue what animal would be doing it either, and I'd say I know a fair amount of our country's fauna. Scream sounded like it had a build-up, not like a scream where you immediately hear the loudest part and then it dies or fades out, but like it started low and got real intense and then stopped. It sounded far enough, say 50 to 70 meters or so, but then it happens again, and again, and again. Now suddenly, it's coming from more sides, and way more sides, and it was getting pretty close. It didn't sound super menacing, even though we were mad scared, shooting my airgun with no rounds to make it louder. It got to the point where the sound seemed like it was coming right where the campfire couldn't shed light. I remembered we had set up some traps for rabbits down the trail that day, so we grew as many balls as we could and went there. Bait was gone, traps unarmed. Stupid idea anyway. Rabbits don't scream like that. We had some pretty strong flashlights, but we couldn't see anything. Sorry for being so anticlimactic, but they stopped suddenly with no clear reason. To us. In conclusion, this was one of the most terrifying experiences I've ever had. And every time someone asks me for a scary story, I share this one. I wish I could get some explanation on this. I've never heard any animal do this, much less communally. Also, my country, Portugal, doesn't have any cougars or anything, which is one of the things I could most approach it to. Maybe there's no explanation. I don't know. Just felt like it's worth sharing. So I've been having these experiences since I was 10. And it happened again a couple of nights ago. So a little information, the paranormal is a taboo subject in my family, and I have no one to ask about this. When I was little, my bed was up against the window on the second floor, and I could hear almost everything that would happen outside. One night, I heard this sound like it was a bouncing ball being bounced in front of my window. This night, there was a full moon, so I could see and nothing was there. I logically thought that the house was creaking or whatever. The bouncing ball noise kept on happening multiple times a week. I kind of got used to the sound and it really didn't bother me until the bouncing sound changed. This is when the bouncing ball turned into footsteps. This freaked me out. It was like someone was pacing back and forth in front of my room. So me being young and just trying to make sense of it, made this sound my guardian angel, and it was just protecting me while I slept. After this occurrence, the two sounds started interchanging back and forth, and as I got older, this started happening less frequently until it stopped. I honestly forgot about it. This noise did follow me to college, and I heard it sometimes at night. I've moved back home due to COVID. My room is now on the first floor, and the porch is outside my window. The porch is decorated for Christmas, so at night, the porch is illuminated. Skip to a couple of nights ago. My bed is again by the window. I was laying in bed when I heard the bouncing ball and I jokingly said, "Hello, Guardian, it's been a while." Right after I said that, the pacing started along with the bouncing. This had never happened before, and I looked out my window. The porch was illuminated by the Christmas lights, and I saw nothing, but I could still hear the sounds. I haven't been scared of this since I was little, but with this new development, it's freaking me out. Does anyone know what this could be?